So, all right, what other
But
questions
then
you got here?
after that, I mean, I read through 1 through 3, and I didn't have.
Okay. Well, let's take a moment. Let's just sit in chapter one first, since it's kind
Okay.
of an intro.
Yeah.
Then, and let's talk about Bathsheba and Solomon.
Okay. I read the
What
beginning.
do you? Um, so, I mean, basically, what happens is now if if Adonijah, this is all with the backdrop of Adonijah sacrificing a sheep, gathering the people together. He wants to be king. So, what's gonna happen to Solomon and Bathsheba if Adonijah's king?
They would be killed.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
not going to be in a good spot here,
Right.
right? So, I mean, you have to think like it is dangerous. It is for for David. Maybe it's the culture that he set up for himself, but I think this is probably just maybe a general attitude. Uh, who, if you're the king, whoever is next in line for the throne
Yeah.
is a threat to you,
Okay. Yeah.
always. So David's sons are a threat to him,
Right.
and he's got to deal with them. Okay. This is kind of like how David was a threat to Saul,
Right.
because
Yeah.
even though he was anointed behind Saul's back, I think Saul kind of knew,
Yeah.
right? Which is why he chased them around for like all of, the second half of First Samuel. All right, chases them around, and um, okay, and so David, his family has some major issues here because he's got all these sons by all these different wives,
Okay.
and each they probably don't think very highly of each other,
Right.
and maybe each wife and her children, her sons, maybe there is some familial respect there.
Yeah.
So like Adonijah maybe was not as much of a threat to Absalom, his brother.
Right.
But when you start going outside of each of those wives, the wife and their children, they're threats to each other.
Yeah.
So the children of Hagit are going to be a threat to the children of Bathsheba,
Right.
right? To Solomon, right? So, and to Bathsheba herself. So this is not a safe thing for Bathsheba and Solomon,
Right.
for Adonijah to be
Well,
declared
now
king.
doesn't Adonijah ask Bathsheba to talk to Solomon for him?
Well, yeah. After,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
please have mercy on
Right.
me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because it was like
absolutely.
he was like, you listen to me, but Solomon won't.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and you realize, I think this is so interesting because Bathsheba appears at that halfway point in Second Samuel,
Okay.
and that's really when that whole affair, when he has this affair with Bathsheba and sends her husband, one of his friends, one of his mighty men, Uriah, out to die because he can't cover it up because Uriah is so noble and so
Right.
he honors the king. I mean, the whole thing is just terrible.
Right.
Uh, you see Bathsheba, and she in that part she's kind of she doesn't have a whole lot of agency. She's not a she um it's really kind of this thing about David and this terrible thing that he does. Here in First Kings, you see her act with agency,
Right.
and you see that Bathsheba is actually pretty shrewd too.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay,
Kind of like Rachel.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, we talked about that,
Yeah.
right? With the household gods
Right. Yeah.
and who else is like that? Well, there's a lot of people that are like that,
Yeah.
men and women, right? There's a lot of
Yeah.
men and women you see that are very shrewd, and they know how to play the political game, and
Yeah.
they will throw other people under the bus in order to do that, and they're surviving is what they're doing.
Right. Yeah.
And so,
Joab.
what
Joab.
Joab?
Yeah.
Oh, Joab is a survivor,
Yeah.
but Bathsheba's kind of like that too.
Okay. Yeah.
And so what she does is, uh, she um, she has to now uh, she calls on David and says, do you know that this is happening? Um, and uh, she's got to kind of work this out, right? So that Solomon becomes king,
Right.
and that's what she does.
Okay.
She's very
Yeah.
politically shrewd.
Yeah.
And so if you go to verse 28, Um, and she's kind of worked this all out. Then King David answered, "Call Bathsheba to me." So she came into the king's presence and stood before the king. And the king swore, saying, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my soul out of every adversity, as I swore to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, saying, Solomon your son shall reign after me, and he shall sit on my throne in my place, even so I will do this day." Then Bathsheba bowed with her face to the ground and paid homage to the king and said, "My lord, King David, live forever." Okay, may my lord King David live forever. And so David calls Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada. Um, these really important people. I mean, you got the high priest and the prophet
Right.
there. This is a big deal. And and so when Adonijah and Joab kind of hear about this, they can't really. There's nothing they can do about it.
Right. Right.
If you got the high
Yeah.
priest and the prophet, forget about it,
Yeah.
right? Um, and and so, um, and so I think it's interesting. I think this shows the shrewdness by on Bathsheba's part. I think this is kind of an interesting window to think: was she always this way, or did she become this way?
Right.
It kind of paints
Yeah.
the whole affair that happened in Second Samuel in like a different light.
Yeah.
It's like, did she?
Well, now was Solomon promised to be king because of that,
Yeah, well,
or like kind of
yeah. I mean,
right?
this is kind of like you brought up Rachel before, and I think that Solomon, remember after uh, David and Bathsheba have the affair, the reason that he sends Uriah off to die is because they find out she's pregnant, and he
Yeah.
tries to cover it all up.
Right.
And remember, because of all that, because of their sin, that child dies,
Okay.
and David grieves over. Well, he grieves before the child dies, and then
Yeah.
afterward he says, "What else can I do?"
Right.
You know, and which is kind of the opposite of Absalom. After Absalom died, then he grieves, and they kind of have to pull him out of it.
Yeah.
And so, so yeah, I think there's something special here. It is very similar to the whole Joseph narrative with Rachel, because remember, Rachel only had two kids,
Right.
Joseph and Benjamin. And in giving birth to Benjamin, that that that's when Rachel died. That killed her.
Yeah.
And so uh so there was something very special then about Joseph and Benjamin to Jacob, especially because Rachel was the one he wanted to marry in the first place,
Right. Yeah.
and clearly loved her more than the rest. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and so here I think you've got something similar going on.
Okay.
Like, there's something very special about Solomon to David.
Okay. Yeah.
And so it's not like it takes a lot for Bathsheba
Right.
to push this, you know? It's not something I think that David would have done for his other kids,
Okay. That
right?
makes sense.
And so yeah, I mean there's a promise made, right? He's gonna rule, and this is a um and you see it happen just right before this. Um and so but she's gonna be the one to make that happen. That's again why uh Adonijah, that's why he goes to her.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense.
I mean, there is maybe this idea that, okay, well, Solomon's gonna kill me,
Right.
but that isn't really like Solomon's character.
Yeah, because the first time he saw him, he was just said, "Go home."
Yeah, he's not. I think he's probably more afraid of Bathsheba than he is
Yeah.
of Solomon, and
I would
he
be
is.
too.
I would be too, and so I think he's going to her and really pleading with her,
Right.
please, please tell your son, wink,
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 wink. Yeah.
right? Like, please don't have me killed
Right.
by somebody else,
Yeah.
right? Um, so yeah, I think this shows. I mean, you really see some interesting players here. You see or you see David at the end of his life. You see Adonijah and Solomon. But I think to me the most interesting character here that stands out is Bathsheba.
Okay.
Yeah. So, um, yeah. Well, let's why don't we stop there?
Alrighty.
We'll pick up again with chapter 2 next time.
Okay.
We had a lot kind of this way of introduction to this.
Yeah.
If you
It's
can't
just gonna
tell,
start
First
left and
Kings,
right.
Well, First Kings is interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the way
Oh
that it
yeah.
starts, and obviously, it's picking. It's not just like the beginning of a book in its own right, like Genesis.
Right.
It is picking up from the narrative of First and Second Samuel, right? And historically, well, in the Greek tradition, you actually have the book of four kingdoms books.
Okay.
So First Kingdoms, Second Kingdoms, Third Kingdoms, and Fourth Kingdoms. And First Kingdoms is First Samuel.
Oh, okay.
Second Kingdoms is Second Samuel. Third Kingdoms is First Kings, and then Fourth Kingdoms is Second Kings.
Right.
Right?
So is that like the whole, not like whole history of Israel, but like from when it was when Saul the king in First Samuel?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
The way that
From
it's
Saul to
yeah.
whenever
So
it
think about
disbanded.
yeah, think about it like this. Here's a timeline. We talked about we talked through Genesis.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So Genesis gets us from the beginning of the cosmos,
Right.
um, to the their time in Egypt.
Okay.
Exodus picks up with slavery in Egypt and gets us to the building of the tabernacle at Sinai and the glory of God filling the tabernacle.
Okay.
Leviticus gets us the rest of like the law code, a continuation of the law code. Then, while they're living God is living in their midst.
Right.
Numbers basically begins with they're ready to go into the land, and then they're afraid, so they wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And it ends with they're actually going into the land,
Okay.
getting ready to go into the land. Deuteronomy then is a restating of all of everything that's happened.
Okay.
It's a Deuteronomos, a second of law.
Okay.
Okay, it's a restating of the whole law, everything that's happened at that point. Joshua, they actually, at that point they've started to enter, kind of. They're kind of the not quite crossed the Jordan yet. Joshua gets them across the Jordan River
Okay.
and their conquests.
Yeah.
Okay, and like they, at one point they take 31 kingdoms,
Oh wow.
right? You think like little city states though.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Judges picks up with the death of Joshua, and you find out they didn't take the whole land. Judges, then we go through a 400 years of cyclical people. They honor God, they don't honor God. Different
Yeah.
judges are prophets who are leading Israel, but they're very uh they're isolated geographically, so they're like regional. They're kind of regional judges,
Okay.
regional leaders, right? Um, Ruth happens during the time of the judges, short narrative that happens during the time of the judges. And then First Samuel picks up with the last judge,
Okay.
Samuel.
Okay.
And he's kind of a regional leader too. And then he anoints the first king, Saul. Saul is still kind of a regional king.
Right.
He dies at the end of First Samuel. Okay.
So now who anointed David?
Uh,
Samuel?
Samuel did.
Okay.
Yeah. And then after Samuel dies, and Samuel's already dead by the end of First Samuel.
Right.
Okay. But then Nathan takes over as prophet.
Okay.
But he's not a judge anymore because we've already got
Right.
kings
Yeah,
now.
king.
So at the end of First Samuel, at the end of First Samuel, that's when Saul dies.
Okay.
Second Samuel picks up. David is now king over Judah. Ishbosheth over kind of Israel, and then Ishbosheth is assassinated very conveniently for for David, and David then rules over all of Israel's united monarchy. So David's rule is really just Second Samuel, and then it bleeds into a little bit of the first few chapters
Right.
of First Kings. First part of First Kings, Solomon becomes king, and then after Solomon becomes king, or after he dies, you know, halfway through, then his son takes over, and the kingdom's divided. And for
Okay.
the second half of First Kings and all of Second Kings, you've got a divided kingdom and chaos.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so that's
Yeah.
that's the biblical narrative up until Second Kings. The Assyrians wipe out the northern kingdom, and the end of Second Kings, the Babylonians, who have taken over Assyria, wipe out the southern
Okay.
kingdom, and that's the narrative all the way up to the Babylonian captivity.
Right.
So that's the story of the Old Testament right there.
Right.
That's the entire story. And then of course the Psalms fit into that, right?
Yeah.
And the Proverbs fit into that,
Well,
and
now,
Job fits into that, and all the different writings. Daniel fits into that, and the prophets all fit into that. But that is the timeline.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I do have one question.
Yeah. Please.
So once Judah was taken over
Yeah.
and annexed, or right, it was
Judah
they.
was, yeah, it was annexed. I
Okay,
would say
yeah.
that's a good word for it.
Um, and then there was no more like state of Israel, right?
There was no, yeah, because at that point you had the northern kingdom and southern kingdom. Assyrians, they they did annex. That's a word that could be used too for that. They killed a lot of the people,
Yeah.
and then but left some of the inhabitants to work the land. But also they would move people groups around,
Okay.
right? So they would put other people there
Yeah.
too.
So kind of like a puppet state almost.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
right? And what's different about the Babylonians is they actually took a lot of the Judahites into exile
Yeah.
to come
Yeah.
to then be moved back into the Babylonian kingdom.
Right.
Um, so yeah. Uh,
Um, and so after that, did they just lived in other kingdoms up until Jesus?
yeah, well, no. So what happens is they are taken into exile. So the northern kingdom was wiped out.
Right.
Um, but again, some inhabitants were left there. They're replaced with other inhabitants. So there's a lot of kind of mixing of, kind of the, tribes of Israel with other tribes in the area.
Right.
And uh, by the time Jesus comes on the scene, there's a name there. Those are the Samaritans.
Okay,
Okay,
yeah.
that's who they
Yeah.
are. This is why the people living in Judea, they don't like
Yeah.
each other.
Right.
It's still this northern southern
Okay,
kingdom
that
thing
okay,
that's
that makes
going on.
sense.
Okay,
Cause I know now would the Samaritans be Jewish too? Because I know they're
they
called
they
Jews because they're from Judea.
They well, that's right. So they would not be considered Jews necessarily. I mean, it depends on who's talking.
Right.
So a Greek might look at him and say, "Well, yeah,
Yeah.
sure." But they followed the five books of Moses.
Okay.
Yeah, they followed the. I mean, Samaritans had the five. They had the Torah, the
Right.
five books of Moses, and um, they were Yahwists, and
Yeah.
so what happens then is when Judah goes in exile into Babylon, they come back 70 years later. They rebuild the temple. By that time, though, it's not Babylon anymore. The Persians have taken over.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Persians then, um, they send them back. Cyrus the Great sends them back, and then Alexander and his conquest takes over Persia,
Right.
and the Greeks, it becomes a Greek province now, and they call it Judea, and
Okay.
that's where Jewish comes from, right?
Right.
Judea, right? So then in the 60s BC, then a few hundred years later, uh, the uh, the Roman general Pompey comes in and annexes it for the Roman Empire.
Right.
And so by the time that's 60 some odd years before Jesus, 66 or something. Uh, then by the time Jesus comes on the scene, they're a part of the Roman Republic.
Right.
So Pompey is technically it's still the Republic, but just a few decades later, then uh, it becomes the Roman Empire, and that's
Right.
what Jesus is born into. So they're back in the land, but they're still a conquered people.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's just been. I don't know. I guess I've always thought. I mean, recent years I've known Israel wasn't there for a while, like the state or
Yeah.
like the actual
Yeah. Yeah.
country Israel. But I knew, or I guess I always thought that it was always there, and like because it's there
No.
now and it was there then.
No,
You don't
no,
really.
no. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying is that the distinction is just it's different. It's not
Right.
the same. So, um, yeah, I mean, it was. And then after about 135, Rome went. 135 was the last big Jewish revolt, the Bar Kokhba revolts from 133 to 135, and Rome said, "You're done," and they
Right.
decimated them. This is after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. They were still revolting against Rome,
Right.
and so Rome just went and just wiped them out. There was one emperor in the fourth century. His name was Julian, who ruled in what, like the 360s, 350s, 360s. His name is Julian the Apostate because Constantine had made Christianity legal, and then son Constantius II, uh, he he pushed Christianity. It was a heretical Christianity, Arianism, but he pushed it.
Okay.
And the emperors after him were also Arians, kind of heretical Christians. But it was, they still called it Christianity, and except for one, Julian, he was a pagan, and he loved pagan
Okay.
sacrifice, and they called him Julian the Apostate. And he had plans to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. He hated Christianity so much that
Really?
his idea was that if you rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, you don't need Christianity anymore. That was his thought.
Oh, because they would.
You didn't need a final
Right.
sacrifice
Okay.
because you
Yeah.
could keep sacrificing.
Yeah.
That was his kind of his
Yeah.
thing, right? Um, and so they drew up plans, and he died before that could happen.
Right.
But I think it's just interesting
Yeah.
that
That's weird.
so yeah, yeah. So anyways, and then a lot of the story of modern Israel picks up with like the Zionist movement in the late
Right.
19th century, early 20th century, and a lot of that also had to do with the after World War II and the Holocaust,
Yeah.
which my family suffered in the Holocaust,
Yeah.
um, and yeah, I mean, there's a lot of history there.
Right. Oh yeah.
So, but yeah, well, we'll keep talking through First Kings.
Yeah. I'm excited.
There's a lot to talk about.
Oh yeah.
I think a lot of stuff that we don't always engage. Some of these at the beginning of First Kings, we kind of engage a little bit.
Right.
But as you go on, you read stuff and you think, "Oh, wow." I mean, you'll get
Yeah.
to Elijah and Elisha, which
Right.
I think people are familiar with those two. But some other stuff you think, "Oh, I can't believe we're reading this." So
Right.
it's interesting stuff. So, but yeah, look forward to it, and
Yeah. Me
thank you
too.
always for your questions, and
Thank you.
yeah, and
Oh yeah.
thank you all for joining us, and we hope you enjoy talking through this part of the narrative.